If you've been watching Canada over the last few months, you already know something is happening, something big enough that it almost doesn't feel real at first. You know those rare moments when a country doesn't just shift policy, but shifts identity. When the ground under an entire political culture suddenly moves. Well, that's exactly what we are watching unfold in Canada right now. And if you think this is just another trade update, or some dull procurement story tucked inside a government briefing, think again. Because for the first time in a generation, Canada might be breaking out of the gravitational pull that's shaped practically every part of its national story. And the speed of it. Honestly, it feels like watching tectonic plates slide in real time. Let me start with something personal. When I first saw the reports about Swedish Gripen jets and potential openings for Chinese electric vehicles, I literally laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. Like, did Canada really just do that? But the more I read, the more I realized, yes, the story was real enough, and yes, the meaning behind it was even bigger. The country long treated as America's quieter, cautious neighbor is suddenly playing a new game. And the question everyone's asking, but no one's answering clearly, is, what does this transformation mean for Canada's future, for its alliances, and for its identity? Before we get into the jets, the EVs, the tariffs, the geopolitics, I want to put a challenge directly to you. If you were the one steering Canada's next major alliance, if you were the one choosing the next direction of the country, would you double down on the familiar continental embrace of North America? Or would you take the riskier route, building deeper ties with Europe, or China, or the broader Indo-Pacific? What future do you think Canada should want? For most of my life, and for the lives of millions of Canadians, there's been this quiet assumption baked into the national psychology. You need fighter jets. You buy American. You want the economy to function smoothly. Keep the border open and keep US markets happy. Even the shorthand for being Canadian has often been defined by negation, what Canada is not. Not American. Not dangerous. Not independent enough to upset the neighbors. That gravitational pull didn't just shape Canada's policies, it shaped how Canadians saw themselves. A kind of permanent smallness. A sense that the ceiling was always low, that ambition needed to be pre-approved by Washington, and that real sovereignty was more symbolic than operational. Let's be honest about who benefited from that arrangement. Dependency disguised as friendship always serves the larger power. And for decades, that asymmetry touched everything: defense, trade, diplomacy, even culture. At one point, roughly 80% of Canada's defense procurement dollars were effectively flowing to American manufacturers. Officials publicly admitted that security planning was overwhelmingly US-centric. Auto manufacturing was quietly welded to US priorities. The entire economy was designed like an extension of the American one. And the longer this went on, the more it became not just policy, but identity. So when you suddenly see that dependency loosen, visibly, decisively, almost overnight, it's jarring. It's also exciting. Because the first steps away from old habits don't erase the past, but they absolutely rewrite the future. And that brings us to the headline that shocked analysts around the world: Canada is actively considering integrating Swedish-made Saab Gripen fighter jets into its fleet. Now on the surface, that sounds like just a procurement update, right? A choice between jets, maybe a new contract. But look deeper. What Sweden is offering isn't a purchase. It's a partnership. Saab isn't simply selling Gripens. They are proposing a full joint venture, manufacturing built on Canadian soil, training Canadian engineers, transferring technology into the Canadian aerospace ecosystem, and potentially creating up to 10,000 jobs. Think about what that means. For decades, Canada wasn't a builder. It was a buyer. It was the consumer in someone else's military-industrial ecosystem. Suddenly, with one proposal, all of that flips. Canada becomes a producer, an innovator, a partner at the design table instead of a customer at the checkout counter. The story isn't about jets. It's about sovereignty. It's about saying no, polite, Canadian, but unmistakable, to the era of automatic obedience. Now imagine being in Washington watching this happen. Imagine being someone like Donald Trump, whose entire political posture relies on America maintaining tight influence over Canada, watching a 3-decade-old military advantage slip away. If you ever thought defense procurement was boring, this is your exception. Because this moment is political, strategic, and psychological all at once. But while everyone was staring at the Gripen deal, something equally massive was happening across the Pacific, something that hints at an even bigger strategic reset. China, after years of diplomatic frost, quietly restored Canada to its official list of approved tourist destinations. And that wasn't even the biggest part. There's credible discussion, serious, high-level discussion, about China lifting its tariffs on Canadian canola. In the western provinces, that's not just an economic story. That's thousands of livelihoods suddenly breathing again. That's 8 years of tension beginning to thaw. And here's the plot twist: this didn't happen under Trudeau. It didn't happen under Harper. It happened after a single 40-minute, face-to-face meeting between MarkCarney and Xi Jinping. One conversation that broke through years of hostility that started during the Meng-Wanzhou crisis. When I first heard that, I had a moment of genuine disbelief. Then it clicked. This is what leadership is supposed to look like, not showmanship, not sound bites, not posturing for cameras. Quiet influence. Calm strategy. Long game thinking. But let's get to the real strategic implication. China isn't just reopening tourism or canola because they feel sentimental. They are opening a door, and they are expecting Canada to walk through it. If those canola tariffs go, they want something in return. And here's where it gets explosive: they want access to the Canadian automotive market. And not just any access. They want Chinese electric vehicles on Canadian roads. Now remember, Canada currently has a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. A tariff designed specifically to protect North American auto manufacturing from global competition. But here's the problem with trying to wall off the biggest EV producer on Earth: eventually, the cracks show. China already produces nearly 40% of the world's EV exports. They dominate battery manufacturing. They've cracked the code on cost efficiency. And their EVs aren't just cheaper. They are increasingly better, faster to build, more advanced, more accessible for consumers. So what happens if Canada opens its door? Here's what happens: the US auto giants lose their built-in Canadian advantage. Prices drop. Choice expands. American leverage shrinks. And suddenly, for the first time in decades, Canada becomes a battleground for global electric vehicle competition. For some people, that's terrifying. For others, it's exhilarating. Because embedded in that shift is something that's been missing for a long time: optionality. Independence. Agency. MarkCarney's entire strategy is about diversification, building sovereignty not by closing doors, but by opening more of them. Sweden on one side. China on the other. A Europe pivot here. An Asia reset there. Canada isn't turning against the US, but it's also not living in America's shadow. And that's the part people underestimate. Canada doesn't have to choose between friends. But it does have to choose whether it wants to be a junior partner or a real player. Now, I won't pretend this is risk-free. Re-engaging China carries diplomatic fallout. Opening the auto market might rattle the North American trade balance. Choosing the Gripen over the F-35, even partially, could complicate joint interoperability. And managing all of that simultaneously. It's like balancing on a geopolitical high wire during a windstorm. Lean too far in any direction and something snaps. But here's the truth that cuts through all the noise: dependency has a cost. And after decades of paying that cost quietly, Canada is finally ready to pay a different price: the price of sovereignty. The price of agency. The price of becoming something more than an appendage of a larger economy. Whether you agree with this direction or not, it's hard not to feel the exhilaration of watching a country step into a new identity. Canada is not reacting anymore. It's shaping. It's not drifting with someone else's gravity. It's creating its own. And for the first time in a generation, Canadians can imagine a future where the country's place in the world is self-chosen, not inherited. Which brings us back to the question I asked you earlier, a question that might actually tell us where this story goes next. If you had the power to choose Canada's next major partnership, where would you steer it? Toward the comfortable, predictable embrace of North America? Or into the open waters of Europe, Asia, and the multipolar world? Do you choose safety or opportunity? Familiarity or possibility? And here's the kicker: the answer isn't just about strategy. It's about hope. About how big Canadians believe their country can be. About whether the old limitations are still shaping the national imagination. Because the end of inevitability is the beginning of agency. When you stop being trapped by what's always been done, you suddenly see how many doors were open the whole time. Thank you for being part of this conversation. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that like button, subscribe for more clarity in the middle of global chaos, and drop your thoughts below. Which path should Canada choose? I'll be reading.